And do you change that value every month or every year?
Well done. The whisper that started it all. It began not with a headline, but with a whisper, a quiet murmur that slid through corridors of power like a cold draught beneath an ancient door. At first it seemed inconsequential, a name mentioned in passing, a file quietly shuffled, a meeting rescheduled with no explanation. Nothing seemed urgent, nothing seemed dangerous, yet the air itself hinted at what was coming. Within days, Buckingham Palace felt heavier, as if the walls themselves sensed the storm. The royal household had survived scandal before. They had endured abdications, divorces, betrayals, and tragedies broadcast to millions. But this was different. This time, the truth came from within, slow, deliberate, undeniable, creeping into the heart of the monarchy like smoke through a sealed room. And when it finally surfaced, it would fracture something fundamental. The Crown had always assumed control was absolute. In the early hours of Monday, as London slept beneath pale mist, an email slipped out from the secure network of the Royal Archives, anonymous, encrypted, its subject line deceptively simple, hiding a secret that had waited decades to see daylight. By sunrise, senior aides convened in a discreet office behind the palace chapel. The tone was sharp, urgent, every word measured. They did not speak of exposure, but of containment. One phrase recurred like a drumbeat: protect the institution first. Few understood what the document contained, only that it referenced an event long whispered about, but never proven. A decision, an arrangement made decades earlier, that if revealed, could shake the monarchy's entire story. By noon, the news had reached King Charles in his private sitting room at Windsor Castle. His private secretary entered quietly, hesitation in every line of his face. "It's about the archives, sir. Something's been recovered." Charles looked up, frowning, his mind racing. That moment marked what one aide would later call the quiet crisis. No statements, no visible panic, just the precise choreography of protocol concealing chaos. Calls were made, advisors summoned, servers scanned. The more they searched, the clearer it became. This wasn't a hack. It was an insider who knew exactly where to strike. Outside, the press was oblivious. The world continued, unaware that the monarchy's most guarded secret had slipped through its fingers like sand. Inside, every step, every bell, every familiar rhythm felt offbeat, tense. By evening, William and Catherine were briefed. The meeting was short, the tone clipped. Sensitive, but manageable, they were told. As the aide left, William whispered, "It's never manageable once they say that." Catherine said nothing, only nodded, eyes distant. Over the years, she had learned that the deadliest crises were quiet ones, the ones that began in silence while London shimmered across the Thames. That night, a file began circulating among a handful of journalists, incomplete, redacted, fragmented, but real. Its contents pointed to a late 1980s decision involving finances, titles, and the quiet reshaping of royal lineage. One long-assumed family truth was untrue, an inheritance rewritten, a bloodline adjusted to protect an image, an heir named not by birthright, but by convenience. If verified, the story wouldn't just stain reputations, it would alter history itself. By dawn, whispers hit Fleet Street. Editors buzzed. A royal revelation or a fabrication? Those glimpsing the file knew it was fact. Facts once freed cannot be silenced. Charles met privately with his most trusted advisers. Conversation measured, civility maintained, but beneath it, alarm pulsed. "We must confirm the extent of exposure and identify the source before the press," Lord Chamberlain said. Charles's expression remained unreadable. He had inherited the throne in an age that valued transparency, yet he had spent decades guarding what transparency could destroy. And if the story was true, he asked softly. The room fell silent. "Then we must decide." Chamberlain's voice finally broke the pause. "Whether the truth serves the crown or ends it." Outside, rain streaked the palace windows, heavy and relentless. Catherine sat alone in her study. The papers already called it the Windsor file. She read early reports, noting omissions, names, dates, motives. Journalists didn't have the full picture yet, but they would. They always did. She closed her laptop and stared at her reflection. Years of discretion, grace, and quiet survival seemed suddenly fragile. The monarchy feared consequences more than scandal. William entered quietly, face drawn. It's breaking faster than they expected. They'll try to deny it, but denial won't hold. Not this time. Catherine looked up. Do you believe it's true? He hesitated. I believe, he said carefully. Truth in this family has always depended on who's allowed to speak it. Outside, thunder rolled. A storm, yes, but ancient, like an omen returning by morning. The headlines were merciless. The royal secret exposed a legacy rewritten. Public reaction split. Some dismissed it. Others demanded clarity. Across the country, one sentiment rang louder than outrage: heartbreak. The monarchy had always been Britain's mirror, reflecting history, resilience, and illusions of permanence. But now, truth spread like ink through water, and that mirror began to crack. Officially, the palace remained silent. Unofficially, phones rang through the night. Lawyers drafted statements that would never be released, and courtiers whispered in gilded corners about what else might come out. The truth had finally emerged, and though it had taken decades, it carried the weight of centuries. The whisper that had started it all was now a roar. For the first time in modern memory, the royal family realised the danger wasn't what the public thought. It was what the public might finally understand. The hidden file surfaced the morning after the story broke. Buckingham Palace became a theatre of controlled chaos. Corridors, usually echoing precision, now hummed with unease. Aides hurried between rooms, composed in expression but frantic in pace. The press office released a sterile statement. We are aware of recent media reports and will not be commenting on unverified material. A denial that revealed more than it concealed. Screens glowed across the communications room, every network carrying the same story. Anchors spoke with caution. Historians and legal analysts speculated, debating implications, while the most powerful phrase repeated in hushed corners, the monarchy's greatest secret. Inside Windsor, Charles sat at his desk, the leaked file before him, slim, just 8 pages, but every line packed enough weight to shake foundations. It referenced a confidential adjustment to succession, quietly authorised after a royal advisor's passing, clinical phrasing, devastating implication, a paternal link obscured, inheritance rewritten to prevent scandal. Charles's fingers trembled slightly. He knew fragments of the story, of course. Every monarch inherits ghosts, but not this full scope. If true, the family line and the legitimacy of certain titles rested on deception. The question wasn't whether the crown could survive this revelation, but whether it deserved to. By midday, William was summoned. The meeting in the king's private study was silent of aides, heavy with unspoken history. Charles gestured to the file. You've read the parts they made public. What do you believe? William answered quietly. Proof matters, not belief. Charles leaned back. There will be those who say this changes everything, William added, and those who realise it only confirms what was always true. Outside, crisis management churned relentlessly. Legal advisors drafted statements, archivists scoured decades, IT traced every digital trail. The investigation was discreet, but merciless. Every file accessed, password used, clearance logged. The more they searched, the clearer it became. The breach came from inside. That evening, Catherine arrived at Windsor with the children. Publicly, the palace needed to show unity, but unity was no longer strategy. It was camouflage. After dinner, alone in the garden with Charles, lamps casting long shadows across the gravel, she whispered, "They say the truth came from the archives." He nodded. Then the past has finally decided to speak. Charles looked at her, tired but resolute. "The past always speaks," he murmured. "We just pretend not to hear it." The next morning, a second leak surfaced, an addendum to the file noting payments made to a private trust in the early 1990s. The sums seemed small, almost benign, yet the timing raised sharp, uneasy questions. It was clear now. This wasn't a single oversight. It was a pattern. News outlets ran with it. linking the findings to earlier whispers of royal cover-ups and missing records. Commentators who had once defended the crown began asking uncomfortable questions. The institution that had survived wars, divorces, and betrayals was now facing something far more corrosive: doubt. William's aides begged him to release a statement, to distance himself from the matter, but he refused. "If I speak now," he said, "it will look like defence. Let the truth stand on its own." Catherine watched him across the room. His restraint, once a quiet strength, now felt like punishment. He carried the weight of a secret he hadn't created, and the burden of shame settled silently over them that night. A meeting was held at Clarence House. Present, the king, his private secretary, and 2 senior advisers. They spoke in hushed tones, voices a mix of fatigue and fear. One suggested a full inquiry, transparency to rebuild trust. Another warned it could destroy what little faith remained. Charles said nothing for a long moment. Then he finally spoke. "We can withstand scandal," he said. "We cannot withstand erosion." Silence filled the room. Everyone understood. Scandal passes. Erosion is permanent. Outside palace gates, the public mood shifted. Shock faded, replaced by quiet disillusionment. Wishers still left flowers and letters, but their messages had changed. "Tell us the truth," one read. "We love you, but we need honesty." It wasn't anger that frightened the crown. It was disappointment. Catherine felt it during her next public engagement. Smiling, shaking hands, listening graciously. Yet she sensed the change in eyes that once looked upon her with awe, now pleading, quietly asking for reassurance that the fairy tale remained intact. Later, in private, she told William, "They don't want perfection anymore. They just want to know it's real." He nodded. Truth is all that's left to give them. But truth in the monarchy was never given freely. That weekend, an anonymous source sent a final fragment of the file to a major newspaper. It contained a decades-old handwritten note from a senior royal official. "We must protect the line at all costs." The meaning was unmistakable. The deception had not been an accident. It had been a choice. The next morning's headline was simple: "The truth finally comes out today." By afternoon, the palace issued a measured, dignified, and painfully detached statement. "Her Majesty's government has been made aware of historic documents whose authenticity remains under review. The royal household will cooperate fully with any necessary clarification." That night, Windsor was silent. Rain beat against the windows, and the ancient castle seemed to sigh beneath its own weight. Catherine stood by the fire, staring at embers. William entered quietly, holding a folded letter. "He wants to address the nation," he said. "Tomorrow night." She looked at him, voice low. "Will he tell them everything?" William unfolded the paper, fingers trembling slightly. "He'll tell them what they need to hear," he said, "not what they deserve to know." They both understood the difference. Outside the palace walls, the world waited for a truth that had already spoken for itself. The reckoning at Windsor, the broadcast, was set for exactly 9 o'clock. Cameras arrived at dusk, their cases rolling across stone like distant thunder. In the king's private study, cables curled beneath Persian rugs. Monitors blinked with quiet vigilance, a white balance card briefly hovering beneath the portrait of a former sovereign whose gaze had witnessed other storms. Outside, London slept. Inside, the air trembled with choreographed ritual. Lights softened, teleprompter angled, chair placed precisely 1 inch to the left. The king rehearsed each line in a voice honed by decades of duty. But tonight there was a new cadence, the rhythm of a man measuring legacy against the gravity of truth. Aides moved with reverent economy. The private secretary reviewed the final draft, designed to acknowledge without conceding, clarify without confessing. Historic records, incomplete context, commitment to transparency within constitutional bounds. Every phrase walked a tightrope across a canyon of consequence. William arrived quietly, ushered through a side corridor to avoid cameras. He stood at the back, hands clasped, listening to words he had not written and could not change. Catherine remained in an adjoining anteroom with the children. A muted newsfeed played, ensuring that the first time they heard their grandfather speak, it would be gentle, not blaring, from a screen that never blinked. At 8:59 p.m., a red tally light flared. The room became a chapel. The director's fingers hovered, then fell. live. The king began. He spoke of the crown's duty to history and the present, of documents newly surfaced, their authenticity under formal review, and of a pledge to cooperate with government archivists and independent historians. He did not name names. He did not describe the trust payments or the adjustments. He offered neither apology nor denial, only a measured promise to meet truth with steadiness. It was a performance of control, sorrow without surrender. Across Britain, living rooms dimmed, cutlery paused, the nation's collective breath held. When it ended, the light snapped off. Applause would have been sacrilege. Instead, there was only the click of a power switch, the faint scrape of a chair, the soft rush of feet, the ritual of departure. William remained until the room emptied. The king removed his lapel microphone slowly, a man shedding armor no longer needed. "You did what you believed, right?" William asked. The king's reply was gentle, tired. "What I believed was survivable." They walked down the corridor lined with portraits whose stillness offered no counsel. "There will be calls for a full inquiry," William said. "There already are," the king replied. "We shall direct them toward context, not confession." William's jaw tightened. Context is another word for distance. Confession is another word for collapse. Their eyes met. Neither blinked. By midnight, public reaction hardened into shape. Commentators praised tone, questioned substance, replayed the three critical phrases: records review, cooperate. Morning papers drafted two versions, measured support on one side, patient skepticism on the other. Letters arriving at the palace told a deeper story, neat, heartfelt, unafraid. "We respect you, but speak plainly. We love the family, but tell us why we were misled. We can forgive the truth. We cannot forgive evasion." In this quiet referendum, the crown faced its most dangerous opponent, disappointment with stamina. Inside Windsor, the reckoning shifted from broadcast to blood. A late council convened. The private secretary, Lord Chamberlain, two legal advisers, and an archivist whose knowledge of footnotes could alter headlines. The archivist confirmed what all feared. The paper trail would not vanish. Marginalia, ledger entries, synchronized sums and dates too precise for coincidence. Everything sharpened the truth. The room fell silent. The king's closing instruction: stability first, then clarity. William returned to Kensington. Before dawn, Catherine waited in the low firelight, the broadcast still open on a tablet. Beside her, it was strong, she said, because she understood the need for small mercies, even as larger truths loom. "Yes," he answered, thinly. She set the tablet aside. "What comes next?" she asked. He looked at the door, at the sleeping house, at the fragile normalcy their children would awaken into. "Next," he said, "we carry it." The following morning brought a development the palace had not anticipated. A former senior courtier, retired and unafraid, agreed to speak on record. Her words were careful, but devastating. She did not accuse. She remembered. She recalled meetings where reputational weather was weighed against institutional continuity. She spoke of protections arranged for the line, of choices made in the old language of necessity. She never said deception. She did not need to. The interview aired at noon and detonated like a polite bomb. Within hours, the government announced an independent historical review. Eminent scholars, limited scope, rapid timeline. It was billed as decisive housekeeping, but everyone recognized the choreography. The palace would cooperate, the review would contextualize, the public would be asked to accept that some stories were too old, too intricate, too sacred to name plainly. Still, something had shifted. The truth was no longer an intruder. It had taken up residence that evening. Schedules were rearranged to make space for reflection. William requested a second audience with the king. No staff, no notes. They met in the same study where the broadcast had been rehearsed, the night's light soft against the glass, the city sleeping beyond the window. A thin moon rose over the long walk, pale and unwilling. William did not sit. His words came sparingly, each syllable measured, an economy that had become its own kind of courage. "We cannot ask the country to trust us and then refuse to trust them with the truth." The king listened without interruption. "We owe them steadiness," he replied. "Steadiness is not silence," William said. "It is strength under exposure." The king's gaze drifted to the portrait above the mantel. Another reign, Another crisis resolved by time's erosion of memory. Time will do what time does, he said. It will blur the edges. William's answer came like a vow, not for us. He left without waiting for dismissal. Passing through the cloister, he saw the camera platforms stacked in shadow like dismantled scaffolding. The image fixed itself in his mind. A stage erased, but not the performance. Catherine's resolve, quiet and relentless, turned outward. She requested and received visits that had nothing to do with the crisis. A children's hospice, a community garden, a small art school. At each stop, she listened more than she spoke, and in every handshake, people pressed something beyond courtesy into her palm, a belief that someone inside the walls could still hear them. After one visit, a woman in a navy coat stepped forward and said simply, "We forgive more than you think." Catherine nodded, steady-eyed. "So do we." That night, a final ripple reached the shore. An additional page surfaced, an internal memo from years ago proposing discreet legislative exploration to secure, if necessary, the public meaning of succession without disturbing its private mathematics. The phrasing was almost beautiful in its cruelty, meaning over mathematics, appearance over arithmetic. The memo's author was long dead. Its relevance remained alive. The palace declined comment. The review expanded by a paragraph. News anchors traded adjectives: measured, poised, incomplete. In kitchens, pubs, and on late buses home, people began telling the story in their own words, the only way a country decides what it believes. Some said the crown had protected stability when the nation needed it. Others said the crown had protected itself when truth needed air. Near midnight, William and Catherine stood at a window high above Kensington Gardens. The city spread beneath them like a constellation engineered by human hands, each light a life indifferent to palace mathematics. "What if this is our task?" Catherine said. "Not to perfect the story, but to hold it open." William's answer was little more than breath. Then they held it in silence. In Windsor, the king walked the corridor alone. His steps were absorbed by carpets woven for footsteps that never faltered. He paused at a window that had once framed victory processions and family photographs. Now it held only a winter sky and the reflection of a man who had chosen endurance over confession. He touched the glass as if it might answer him. It did not. By dawn, the nation had not collapsed, nor had the crown, but something irrevocable had changed. The people had seen the mechanism. The velvet curtain was still drawn, yet the gears were visible around its edges. In that knowledge lay both danger and possibility. The reckoning at Windsor was not an ending. It was a hinge. What swung next would depend on whether the family behind the facade could find a language that honoured both history and the heartbeat beyond the gates. Catherine's quiet betrayal. The storm had passed, at least outwardly, the morning after the king's address. Windsor felt eerily calm, as though the castle itself had exhaled after weeks of tension. Inside, the air was heavy. Silence had replaced panic, and silence was far more dangerous. Catherine woke early, as she often did before dawn. The corridors were still, and the scent of rain lingered through open windows. She walked slowly past portraits of past queens, women who had smiled through wars, losses, and scandals of their own. Their eyes, painted centuries ago, seemed to watch her. Now, with a knowing pity, they witnessed the carefully measured address of the night before. The king had spoken of historical complexities, of truths unearthed by time, and of an enduring commitment to integrity. It was a speech that comforted without confessing, that apologised without admitting fault. The nation had wept, but the palace had not healed. After breakfast, Catherine was called into a private meeting. William was already there, hands clasped behind his back, standing beside the window. Behind him, 2 senior advisers and the king's secretary waited. The topic was not the leak, it was her. Newspapers had printed photos that morning. Catherine, weeks earlier, leaving a discreet charity meeting. The headline implied she had known about the documents long before the story broke. A lie, or perhaps a half-truth. She had known something was coming, a whisper from a trusted contact. A name mentioned in passing, a request for discretion. She had chosen silence, not out of deceit, but protection. When the advisers left, William turned to her. "They think you might have been warned," he said softly. "Maybe someone trusted you with more than you realised." She met his gaze, calm, unshaken. "And what do you think?" William hesitated for the first time in years. She saw doubt flicker behind his composure. "I think," he said finally, "you've carried too much on your own." She turned away. The window framed the gardens where staff pruned roses. Even the flowers, she thought, were managed into perfection. Later that afternoon, she met the king in his study. He appeared frailer than she remembered. His voice, gentler, almost pleading. "You've been steadfast," he added, perhaps too steadfast. "When truth comes for us, we cannot shield it, only shape it." "I wasn't shielding," she replied quietly. "I was waiting for what?" he asked. "The right moment to tell the truth." "But now," she said, "it's too late. The truth told itself." That night, Catherine sat alone in her room. The wind rattled the windows, and rain began again. She opened her journal, a habit she rarely indulged, and wrote just 5 words. "I understand their silence now." She thought of generations before her, consorts, queens, mothers, women who had carried secrets, not their own. History judged them by grace, but never by cost. The monarchy's survival had always depended on women who endured rather than spoke. In another part of the castle, William met with his private secretary. Plans were underway for an internal review of historical records, a gesture toward transparency that, in truth, would reveal very little. "We can't undo what's been done," the secretary said. "We can only manage how it's remembered." William's reply was quiet, sharp. "History doesn't belong to us. It belongs to those who tell it." He left the room, thoughts heavy. Every decision now felt like an echo of another's compromise. Duty was supposed to preserve honor. Instead, it was eroding. Days passed. Media frenzy waned, replaced by speculation about reforms, inquiries, and public trust. Within the royal family, relationships fractured into silence. Conversations were short, formal, cautious. Catherine and William spoke politely in public, rarely in private. Their unity, once unbreakable, had become performance. One evening, she walked alone to the chapel. The air was cool, candles flickering against stone walls. She knelt, not out of ritual, but weariness. "If truth destroys us," she whispered, "then perhaps we were already gone." Her words echoed softly in the empty room. Meanwhile, public sympathy shifted again. A nation exhausted by revelation began romanticizing the pain. Commentators spoke of the resilience of a family holding together under unbearable strain. The tragedy had become a spectacle, and in that spectacle, people found comfort. The monarchy, it seemed, could even survive heartbreak by turning it into narrative. Catherine understood this better than anyone. Every appearance, every smile, every carefully chosen dress had become a line in a story written by others. But now, for the first time, she wondered what would happen if she stopped playing her part. A week later, she quietly requested to step back from public duties, just temporarily, the statement said. But those close to her knew it was more than exhaustion. It was self-preservation. When the announcement was released, the world reacted with sorrow and speculation. Headlines spoke of the toll of truth of a princess, undone by revelation. But those who saw her in private said she had never looked more at peace that evening. She and William shared a brief conversation by the fire. He spoke of upcoming engagements of speeches he must give. She listened, nodding softly, then said, "You were born to lead, but I was never born to follow." He looked at her for a long moment, then simply said, "I know." They sat in silence, the flames reflecting in their eyes. Two souls, bound by duty, divided by truth. Outside Windsor stood quiet again, as it always did after storms. But something irreversible had shifted. The monarchy would continue as it always had, yet those within it would never be the same. For Catherine, the betrayal had not been what others thought she'd done. It was what she'd endured to protect them. The truth had come out, yes, but it had taken her heart with it. The morning the review was due, London felt unnaturally quiet. Traffic moved, trains arrived, shop doors opened, yet everything seemed to pause on the inhale. The report itself was slim, a preliminary brief from independent historians, but everyone understood it would not be judged by length, it would be judged by what it permitted the nation to imagine. At 9 o'clock, a PDF icon appeared on the Cabinet Office website. Servers staggered under rush hour. Curiosity headlines bloomed in real time. Words the Crown preferred to avoid adjustment, discretion, protection. Ambiguity lined the pages like the careful stones of a defensive wall. The review did not accuse it. Verified records, synchronized dates, and acknowledged institutional decisions taken in the context of reputational weather. Names were absent. Consequences were implied. It was true in the vocabulary of survival. In the press room at Buckingham Palace, cameras waited for a statement that would not arrive. The king had chosen silence, dignified, deliberate, infuriating. Instead, a single page went out to every newsroom. The royal household welcomes the clarity provided by independent scholars and reiterates its commitment to the stability of the constitutional settlement. There will be no further comment at this time. Stability. Settlement comment withheld a lexicon that had carried the monarchy through storms, now sounded like echo in an empty hall. Outside the gates, the public did what they always do. When faced with an untouchable facade, they created their own language. Some brought flowers with notes that read, "We still believe," others brought photocopies of footnotes underlined in blue ink. On a nearby wall, someone chalked a sentence that drew a small crowd. "We cannot love what we are not allowed to know at Windsor." The king read the review alone. The study was unlit, saved for winter daylight. He turned the pages slowly, held them longer than he needed to, and set them down with a precision that looked like care and felt like fatigue. When the private secretary entered, Charles asked a single question: "Does it end?" The reply was, "Honest Majesty, it eases." The king nodded once, which in a palace is the difference between command and prayer. "Then we ease it." William chose a different route, scheduled to open a youth enterprise centre in Birmingham. He considered cancelling, then decided the opposite. He would go, and he would not hide behind prepared lines about opportunity and community on the train north. Aides hovered with draft phrases, service learning moving forward, and watched him ignore them. He arrived at a hall of teenagers who cheered first and then fell into the hush that follows recognition. He did not use a lectern. "Thank you for welcoming me." He began, voice steady but unvarnished. "I know many of you have questions I cannot fully answer. I can say this much. A family, like a country, is accountable to truth. Even when truth costs more than pride, our duty is to carry that cost without breaking what we are meant to protect." He paused, let the line settle, and added quieter, "We will do better by you if we are honest with you." It lasted 2 minutes. It travelled farther than any broadcast. The clips circled the globe before he'd left the building. Commentators called it an implicit rebuke, a generational line, a promise made in public that would have to be kept in private at Kensington. Catherine watched it once and closed her laptop. The words were his, and they were hers too. She spent the afternoon at the hospice. She refused to abandon sitting with a grandmother who asked only for a hand to hold. The woman did not mention palaces or papers. "You look tired, dear," she said. "Rest is holy work." Catherine smiled with her eyes and said, "I'm learning." When she left, a staffer pressed a note into her palm. "We are still here." When the noise goes quiet, she folded it into her sleeve like a relic. By evening, Parliament filled with statements calibrated to sound, cross-party, and posturing all at once. The Prime Minister praised the steady stewardship of a treasured institution. The leader of the opposition called for a fuller accounting so that public trust is anchored in daylight. Sharp members on both benches recognised the choreography, shared reverence, shared reluctance, and a promise that time itself would be the inquiry. No one had the appetite to conduct outside. A thin rain returned and made everything look briefly new. Inside, the family newness was not available. The king met William at Windsor without staff. No portrait. Watch them. This time, they dispensed with a ceremony that neither could sustain. Charles began with gratitude. Birmingham was well handled and moved to caution. "We must not turn this into a referendum on the crown." William did not argue. He named the difference. "It already is, sir. It's just not on a ballot." The king's gaze fell to his hands, then to the window where dusk arranged itself into the outline of a country he had spent a lifetime trying to serve by keeping it from seeing too much, you believe. "I erred," he said. "Not a question." William, who had learned to bear the grief of agreement, answered softly, "I believe we inherited errors and repeated their logic." They stood in a silence that did not reconcile, but recognized when they parted. No decision had changed yet something essential. Had mutual knowledge that love and duty were no longer synonyms in their house. Catherine returned late to London and found the children asleep. School projects spread like constellations across the kitchen table. She tidied absent-mindedly. Glue caps, crayons, a cardboard crown whose edges were already fraying, and realized the metaphor before she could refuse it in her room. She wrote a final page in the journal she kept for difficult seasons. The truth did not end us. It ended the story we were told to tell. We will learn a different one or become relics of the old. She closed the book and slid it into the back of a drawer beside a sealed letter she had never sent just before midnight. A small gesture became the day's most eloquent act. The Royal Archives posted a notice. Select records cited by the review would be exhibited for public viewing over 3 consecutive Saturdays. Entry by time ticket phones permitted. It was both controlled and radical access measured by hour, meaning measured by each visitor's gaze. The announcement contained no apology, only logistics, but the symbolism was unmistakable, for once the curtain would not merely stir, it would open. The first Saturday arrived cold, and bright people queued in coats in ordinary shoes. A retired history teacher wept at a marginal note that matched a memory she'd carried since her first term. In the classroom, a delivery driver traced a line of ink with his finger before catching himself, embarrassed, then grinning at the guard who pretended not to see. A schoolgirl photographed a ledger and whispered to her mother, so they wrote it down like we write homework in one room. An archivist answered questions with a humility that felt new. Why wasn't this shown before someone asked? The archivist folded his hands because we were not brave enough to be ordinary. He said, by the second Saturday the queue had shortened, not because interest waned, but because the appetite had been met with something it rarely receives a portion of what it asked for. Quietly, without the fanfare of triumph, disappointment eased not everywhere, not completely enough in pubs. The conversation softened from outrage to argument in kitchens, from accusation to acceptance. Trusts did not flood back its seep. In the third week's dusk, William and Catherine walked the long path behind Kensington, where the city lights began to smudge into the sky. They had chosen no cameras and no aids. Their steps matched without trying. "Do you think it holds?" he asked the Crown. She considered the question as if it were a living thing. "If it breathes," she said. "If it chooses breath over marble." He nodded a small private act of assent. "Then we will breathe," he said, "even if it means gasping." For a while at Windsor, the King stood again at the window that had become a mirror and a sentence. He had not lost his country, nor his son, nor the crown. He had lost a certainty that had disguised itself as wisdom in its place was something less comfortable and more usable, a recognition that endurance without confession calcify into distance. He touched the glass, lifted his hand away, and let the room grow. Dark night settled on the palaces and terraces on buses, sighing at stops and foxes, cutting shadows through mews. The review remained online. The archive tickets sold out, the letters arriving by the sack. Some hard, many kinds. Nothing ended. Everything altered. Truth had spoken. Not with a crash, but with a pressure that bent what would not break. The monarchy endured as it knows how to do. The family, as families do, learned to carry a weight it could not set down, and somewhere between marble and breath, a new story waited, one that would demand fewer curtains and ask at last to be told in daylight. In the end, truth did what time and power could not. It spoke, the monarchy stands, but never the same. If this story moved, you subscribe and stay with us as we continue to unveil the untold chapters of Britain's royal legacy, where every silence hides a secret and every revelation reshapes history. The next story begins where this one leaves off beneath the crown behind the curtain.